I've started compiling and reviewing some of the things that I found interesting since October 7th, things that I think need re-highlighting, rehashing, and bringing attention to. One of them, um, was a press conference that Israeli spokesperson Doran Spielman gave on December 2nd, 2023. So this is before the invasion of Rafah. This is while Israel was pummeling Gaza with 2,000-pound bombs and killing nearly 200 people a day. Israeli spokesperson held a conference on Twitter. At the time, as I said, Israel was bombing the shit out of Gaza. And it was also at the height of the TikTok genocide. So Israeli soldiers were filming themselves spray painting Stars of David in Palestinian people's homes. They were getting into Palestinian women's lingerie. This was at the height of it. That is something that is still ongoing, the lingerie phenomenon. And I had the opportunity to speak to an Israeli spokesperson. I had never had that opportunity before. And so I asked Doran Spielman about the behavior of Israeli soldiers inside Gaza. And his response, I went back and listened, didn't age well. It didn't age well at all. He defends the soldiers by saying, quote, "At least they're not raping anybody." We know that that isn't true. We know that they have been raping people. He also goes on to say two other things. One of them being that at least they're not beheading babies. Well, maybe they're not beheading babies, but their bombs certainly have been. We've seen this also. Numerous babies, not only babies, but numerous people have been beheaded, including the Al Jazeera journalist Ismail al-Ghul. And of course, he follows that up with saying some other things that, that we know that Israel has done. But he repeats the lie, which that first lie, that grand lie of 40 beheaded babies, which was repeated by many in the media, never retracted, never fixed. And we all know that that's a lie now. We know because the White House said, no, actually, we never saw that. We know because Israel's own military said no beheaded babies. And so that grand lie just sort of still hovers in the ether, and people are still repeating it. The other thing he goes on to say is at least they're not burning people in their homes. Turned out to be another lie. We know that numerous Palestinians have been burned alive in their tents, in particularly Al-Mawasi, which they turned into a bloody inferno. So all of this to say that Spielman here regurgitates most of the boldest lies told by Israel about what happened on October 7th. And before I play the tape of that press conference from December, a little update on Doran Spielman. He's no longer an official spokesperson for the Israeli government. He has joined hands with rabid liar and the man who was fired for lying, Elon Levy, who has created what is known as the Citizens Spokesperson's Office for Israel. Have a look.
I'd like to call on, just give me one moment here. Okay, Samira. I think that you had tried to speak before. Yes, Samira.
Thanks
Hi.
very much, Doran. I'm just wondering, of the thousands of Palestinians that have been killed in Gaza, how many Hamas members, do you have a sense of how many Hamas members the IDF has been able to exterminate in the last 58 days?
So it's a very good question. And I understand the depth of the question because we want to understand of those thousands, how many are civilians that are non-combatants, which is a tragic loss of life, and how many of them are combatants? And also, what is the price to be paid for killing these terrorists. And I think if I kind of dive down into the depth of the question, it's a question that is of a great concern. We have killed thousands of Hamas fighters.
How are you determining that? How are you determining that?
So most of what we do, and we release their pictures, including of the battalion commanders today. We release many of the pictures of certainly the battalion commanders.
Released. I've seen about 13 photos released in the past 58 days.
No, I think that there's been a lot more photos that have been released in the last 58 days. And we also have the battalion commanders, the division commanders, and whenever we can identify that Hamas terrorists have been killed, we try to publicize it. We also have intelligence where you see a known Hamas commander, where you know who he is, and you see around him in certain areas a large amount of armed people. We may not know all of their names, but we know that because there are 40,000 Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip, plus minus. And if you take out this commander and you take out the people around him, that most likely they're surrounded by terrorists. However, one of the most difficult things here is that Hamas does not release reliable information. When an Israeli is killed, all those 1,200 people, their names have been out there. We've announced it, which ones are soldiers and which ones are civilians, which ones are in the hospitals and which ones are not here. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, as I'm sure you know, simply cannot be relied upon for information. I mean, case in point, the Al-Ahli Hospital, right? I mean, 600 people, right away, 600 people were killed. I'm even putting aside the fact that they blamed Israel for doing it. In the end, it was Hamas. In the end, there were reports that there were 200 killed or 100 killed. But you know what? It's impossible to rely on their numbers. But at the same time, I want to tell you, even one civilian in Gaza that's been killed is unnecessary. And when we look at war and you look at a regime like Hamas that is so willing to barricade themselves underneath civilians, I think really what we need to do is really scream out loud. The international community needs to scream and say, Hamas, stop acting like cowards, stop hiding beneath civilians. You massacred civilians. You've gone back to hiding beneath civilians. Go out into the open and fight the IDF in the open. If they did that today.
Thanks, Doran. Thank you so much. I understand. Thank you. I just wanted to also ask, there's been a lot of this imagery and videos of IDF soldiers on TikTok, and they're in Palestinian people's homes. They're using their toilets. They're spray painting obscenities on their walls, spray painting Star of David's. And then there's images of them dancing on the beach, DJs and all this stuff. What sort of message is that giving out to the world, these sort of TikTok IDF soldiers?
Well, I can tell you that, first of all, there are around 350,000 people, myself included, who've left their families and are not sending TikToks and are fighting a war against Hamas, which is a brutal terrorist organization. And I'm not dancing on the beach, and the beaches have very few people on them. And the IDF soldiers that spray paint Stars of David, there are very few of them. And most of us are engaged day to day in a war against people who are trying to kill us. And not only are they trying to kill us, they announced, and I know that you saw, because maybe they did a mistake in overplaying their hand, that October 7th was a rehearsal to do October 7th again, and again. And so I think the overall, you can't control every single soldier and every can of spray paint. We're not seeing IDF soldiers raping the women of Gaza. We're not seeing IDF soldiers beheading babies and burning Palestinian civilians in their home. What we're seeing is Israeli soldiers who are risking their own lives to kill Hamas terrorists. And if they walk around with a can of spray paint, they shouldn't. And if they dance on the beach, I'm not going to go after somebody who's dancing on the beach. But what I can tell you is they're not behaving like Hamas. And if the international community sees a Star of David spray painted on a building and people using toilets and people in Gaza, it'd be nice if there were, if they didn't have to be in Gaza. The whole reason we're in Gaza is because you have people who shed their humanity and behave like animals. They're not animals, behave like animals. They are human beings who chose to behave like animals and slaughtered innocent people. So I think if I was around the world, I would kind of compare these two and I would say, wow, look at Hamas. They're a terrorist organization. Look at what they did to these people. It's despicable. I hope that's what people are saying.
Thanks a lot for answering the questions. My last one is about the New York Times piece that came out recently.
We don't interrupt
the 40-page document that was ignored by the IDF. Could you tell me why the IDF ignored this 40-page document?
It's a very good question. And I and everybody else in Israel have not only read the New York Times, this came out at the beginning of the war, has been on Israeli TV. And there's a huge question on all of our minds, which if we didn't have to fight right now a humongous war against Hamas and a war against Hezbollah in the north and deal with, Houthi rocket, missiles that are coming from Yemen and other international, terrorist players that are being funded by Iran, we would spend more time on this. But the big question is in Israel is how did this happen? As the Israel Defense Forces, as the IDF commander-in-chief said, Herzl Levy, he said, maybe day 2, we failed. We failed to defend the people of Israel. And I can tell you this, Samir, is that, we're going to do a very thorough inquiry. This document presents maybe some of it. We have to verify what's in this document. And clearly a lot went wrong. And I'm not going to put a silver lining on that because if we put a silver lining on it, I'm not going to say we were right. We did a good job on October 7th. No, October 7th was one of the worst days in the history of the state of Israel. And I can tell you as an IDF soldier, I personally take responsibility. I think we all do because these are our people. They're the same families as one small country. And I've seen what's written in that report. It's chilling. And I think when we actually find out what happened, it's going to be even more chilling. But we're going to have to do a real, very deep dive into what went wrong. And I think in Israeli fashion, we'll do it. And we will learn from it. And hopefully it won't happen again in the future. But I think it was a good question.
Thanks,
Okay.
Doran.
Thank you.